Hello and welcome to the GC Sunscast. This episode of the GC Sunscast is brought to you by our Patreon donors, Old Soul, Jack's dad, Paul Vosti, Tom Kim and James Wood. Thanks to our donors. If you'd like to support us financially, head on over to patreon.com/GC Sunscast to keep the show alive. With your help, we can reach goals such as taking live calls and producing more than one show a week. If you can't help us financially, that's alright. Head on over to Facebook and YouTube. Click, like, subscribe and follow to spread the word of the GC Sunscast. But for now, let's move on to the show. Yes, we're back with another episode of the Gold Coast Sunscast Live. My name is Shane, your host, and joining me as he does each and every episode, Tom, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, g'day Shane. A bit of a disappointing result on the weekend, but good to see the boys out in full fettle and having a run around. It's going to be interesting next 9 days to see who the best 22 is.
Yeah, it will be. That's really the only thing to look forward to. I feel really flat after the week. Not just the game versus Sydney, but the ACL injury to Rory Thompson. And more recently, we've just found out Rankin's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks with a hamstring injury, which includes a slight tear of the tendon. So that's never good for a young player. And Young as well is out with an ankle injury. And at this stage, it's to be confirmed how long he's going to be out for. It just feels like our season's gone downhill, like before the season's even started.
Yeah, I can see that, but on the good news is that Nick Holman, Jordan Murdoch, and George Holland-Smith will be available for selection for the first game. So, whilst it looks like we've just lost 3 players, we've got 3 coming back in. So, the injury list hasn't gotten any longer, and Corey Ellis and Josh Corbett are basically going to be back, if not by week 1, then by week 2. And then you've got a couple of other guys who'll be back in time for the NEFL to start, if not game 1, then game 2. So I think our list is looking pretty good injury-wise. But, the big one was Rory Thompson. I mean, in that training session, he gets ruled out for the season and Jordan Murdoch gets a concussion, which is never good. So, I bet you they wish they had have gone for light training instead of hard at it.
Yeah, so didn't we have a knock? Murdoch might have suffered a knock or something. We had another player miss out on Friday because of a training mishap as well. So it just seems like Friday was a bad day and it seemed to continue over through the weekend. But we will move on. Football doesn't start until next week. So, realistically, I don't think anyone was expecting Gold Coast Suns to have a tilt at the flag this year. But if I'm being a pessimist, I'd be saying, well, our chances of going for the flag is certainly done and dusted now.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess what the optimistic outlook is that we have a pretty cushy first 5 weeks. You'd rather have our injury list than St Kilda's injury list. I mean, I really feel for those 2 players, for them who, they've got to question if their career is over. And St Kilda had a win on the weekend. Their injury list is 15 or 16 deep, and some of their best players out, and there aren't any teams in that first 5 games who are really in anyone's calculations for top 8 or to go particularly well this year. So I still think we can give the first 5 weeks a good shake. Of course, we did that last year, and look where it got us. So I'm optimistic for the short term. Corollary of that is if we don't go very well in those first 5 weeks, it's only going to get harder. So it could be another year of pain ahead where we sort of have to give every single player on the list a run and see how they go. At this stage, I'm still optimistic, though. Quite optimistic that the round one game against St Kilda is going to be a big win as well, because they don't have much left in the tank.
All right, well, you stay optimistic for this episode, because we're going to try something a little different. I'm feeling so flat about our result that I've really only got a lot of pessimistic things or concerns I'd like to put out there. And throughout this episode, you be the optimist and you try and turn me around and show me, the bright side and, where I'm getting it wrong and what's the actual, what is the positives to take out of the JLT game from the weekend and, the silver lining for the injuries that we've suffered. So let's get underway with the news. Well, we pretty much covered it. Rory Thompson's out for the year with an ACL. Rankin's had a hamstring injury and is out for 6 to 8 weeks. And Young, with his ankle, is injured. The good news is Holman and... help me out, Tom. Who's the other one?
Holland Smith and,
yes, that's
and Holman. And Murdoch was never really on the injury list, but he was left out because they were just being cautious because he had a head knock. So that's good, because none of those, all three of those players could have played on the weekend. They were just being cautious.
Yep, well, we're certainly going to be having some more players coming in, so, that's got to help. But
yeah.
Injuries to Rory Thompson, I mean, besides Jared Witts, he and Peter Wright, he's probably the most important player in the side.
Yeah, I mean, we do tend to have to do without him for a few games a year anyway, so it's not like we haven't done it before. My first inclination was to say that Sam Day just needs to go back, because we've got some forwards that we can try out who can get some goals. And Sammy's never really been a noted goal kicker. He wants to play forward, but if he's needed down back, because let's face it, we've got Hanley and Harbrow down back who do provide that maturity, but without a third sort of, veteran player, it looks a bit young at times. I'd sort of like to see Sammy go down there. He's almost got the same height as Thompson. He's got better usage of the ball, so he's going to get a few more possessions. He can chop out in the ruck, so one thing we do sort of see, and in this particular game, that there were a lot of hit outs, and Witsy can't do everything. Otherwise, he's just not as effective. So. Yeah, I reckon Sammy Day. And if it's not Sammy Day, well, we've got a lot of depth at that position. And, perhaps after a half a season in the NEAFL, Ben King might be ready to step up. And Ben King's kind of the natural successor to Rory Thompson in terms of height and ability. He's got more better ability. And he wasn't terrible either, Ben King.
He did struggle. Let's not sugarcoat it. He did struggle. I don't know whether he just struggled with the pace of the game or the physicality, but he just didn't live up to the hype that had been built up during the preseason since we selected him. And I mean, that's probably due to the hype was probably based around him playing forward as he did for most of last year, because his brother was injured.
Which is what I think is part of the problem, is that he did go and play that season forward, and now we're chucking him in at the back, and we're not exactly going small. So he sort of, when the ball goes in there, it's kind of a bit like a scramble, and there's all these big Suns guys charging up for the ball, and he's the guy who gets sort of bumped out of the contest. Whereas you'd kind of like him one-on-one with an opposition forward. I mean, he did get beaten a couple of times. I will say this: I like what he did with the ball when he got the ball, and there were times when he came up with the ball in a contested situation, and that was just, it was just good. You could just sort of see, look, he's a kid, but he knows what to do with it. He's cool-headed when he's got it. he's just got to get a bit more of it and back himself a bit more to go out there and take a few intercept marks and sort of play to his strengths. There was one particular passage of play where he was sort of pretty much caught out of position, but he just ran with it, and nothing was going to happen if it didn't work out. But he was ready and willing to be part of the chain of hand passes that got us through their midfield. And I just really liked it. I know that the commentators sort of went, "Hang on, who was that little link man in there?" And then they realised it was him. So yeah, I'm not. I've got to be optimistic. Tomo's not coming back, and we probably have half a dozen players who could play in his position. So, including going right the way back down to our rookie Caleb Graham. And I'd like to talk a bit more about this later because I think it's an important discussion to have. But my old Tom's take on not picking Dirk Conan. Well, now we've got a chance to pick a player to replace Thompson. Well, why not just pick Dirk and put him in the rotation? And if he makes a debut by the end of the year, well, that's good. But yeah, bring him in because there's 17 other clubs who could potentially pick him for with an eye on keeping him for the future. So
okay, but let's get back to the season at hand. We've lost our number one key defender, Rory Thompson. Who's going to take the players like Buddy, Brown and Cox in the down at full back? Jerry Stiller's just asking the question on the live chat. Have you got an answer, Tom? Is it Sam Day, or are we going to be relying on Collins and Homsch?
Yeah, Homsch has stood on some of the best full forwards in the competition and kept them goalless. So he's the guy who is able to do it, but he's always giving away size, and you can have a really good game at fullback and give away 5 goals. So we don't really want to be relying on him for it all, and I actually like him for other things that he offers. And Sam Collins is a big boy. Let's not forget we got Jack Leslie's coming back in a few weeks. He won't be fit for round 1, but he's sort of thereabouts for the first maybe round 2 or 3. Not that you'd throw him straight back in, but he's an option. But I do have to say, I just think Big Sammy Day, he's almost got the skill set of Thompson. He's probably stronger, but he's definitely got that ability to use the ball. And maybe sometimes the negative parts of Thompson's game is that he's not very confident using it, and he generally only gets that 4 or 5 possessions a game, even though he does a lot of good things. So Sammy Day getting 15 to 20 possessions off the out of the back line, he doesn't need to, but if he did, or he could even be taking the kickouts because he can roost the ball a long way. So yeah, I just think that's it's not been the Stuart Dew thing, but it was an Eade thing and it was a McKenna thing where they put Sam Day back in the back line. So and some would argue he played better football in the back line. So, yeah, that's my solution.
All right, so Tom thinks Sam Day goes back to cover Rory Thompson. I probably still lean towards Collins and Homsch. They're doing a good job. They're both impressed at different times throughout the pre-season comp. And throw in Charlie Ballard as to take the intercepting. I think we've got a pretty strong defence in that scenario. Still, Rory Thompson is a huge loss, and there are still question marks over whether Collins and Homsch and even Day are capable of shutting down a player like Buddy, Brown or Cox. They're absolute stars of the competition. And Jay Kennedy from West Coast has always traditionally killed us as a Suns fan.
And Jack Homsch doesn't like him one little bit.
No. All right, well, let's move on to the other big injury news, and that was Rankin. So we all had high hopes for him. We'd seen a decent-sized highlights reel already from him in a few games that he has played. So I guess that small forward position sort of opens up the X-factor player. Now, That's going to be a tough one. Again, we do have quite a few small forwards. I mean, it probably does lock in a player like Darcy McPherson. However, my opinion was Darcy should have been in the side before then anyway to provide that defensive pressure. So let's look at the players. I mean, maybe this ensures Lukosius plays. Maybe they change the structure to go with a more mobile forward, and Lukosius suits that mould. Or what about, assuming we keep Ainsworth in the middle, how about Archie goes back to playing forward?
I don't think we've got any shortage of small forwards. In fact, without Rankin, I could still name 6 players who could play in that forward line who were all picked in the draft at pick 8 or higher. So there's and we've got we've got a bloke like Will Powell who doesn't fit that but he's playing really well. So you wouldn't mind Will Powell playing on a half forward flank and perhaps rotating a little through the midfield himself.
Yeah, you're right there. Will Powell did spend a bit of time as full forward even for the Suns last year. So he does have the ability to play as a forward.
It just probably justifies his place in the 22 because he's pushing for it. He's got the talent. He's really made leaps and bounds in improvement. And I don't think we could justify having him as just a midfielder. He kind of needs to be maybe a forward who rotates through the midfield to give someone a bit of a rest. You've got Sexton in as a lock. And I think he's proven in the preseason here that he's just got goal sense. And when you get it to him and you give him opportunity, he'll take it. And he's kind of the senior player in the forward line. So you're definitely going to have McPherson and Sexton, obviously Peter Wright, and it looks like Chris Burgess has won the full forward spot. He didn't have terrific accuracy, but he made a lot from not much, and that can sometimes turn into 3 or 4 goals pretty quickly. So as far as who's going to take that smaller forward role, maybe Ainsworth spends a bit more time up front. I'd like to see Ainsworth through the middle more, but maybe Ainsworth and Touk Miller kind of switch places and give Touk a bit of a rest up forward where he could just be quite damaging himself. So I don't think we're in any danger there. It just means that we're going to get better when Rankin comes back, if he can crack back in, because if someone like Callum Archie starts kicking 2 or 3 goals a game, it's all over.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. I mean, we were all just looking so forward to seeing Rankin play. He's probably a favourite for the rising star. But you do make a good point. Will Powell looks like he could really have an impact. I've been searching for how to get Will Powell into my best 22 for most of at least the last few weeks since I've seen him in the practice games. And I haven't really been able to justify putting him in the midfield with all the midfielders we're trying to squeeze in there. But a position opening up in the forward pocket, half-forward flank, I really think that would suit Will Powell. So, yeah, you've actually turned me around there. I'm quite confident Will Powell would be a good fit, a good replacement for Rankin.
Going to call that a win then?
Yeah. And the last one is Aaron Young with the ankle. Now, there are question marks on whether he was best 22 to begin with, at least with fans throughout the preseason. I think now we've got the depth of the experience to be able to cover someone like Young, with George Hall-Smith and Murdoch in the side, as well as Burgess and Collins sort of providing mature bodies. I don't think Josh Corbett as well. Yeah, I don't think Young's too big of an injury concern as far as immediate impact to the side. And yeah, Josh Corbett, I mean, he's not going to be playing round 1. He should be available, but you'd think his fitness wouldn't be up to scratch, having missed the last 4 to 6 weeks with injury. Yeah,
it's kind of traditional to have a NEFL practice game with Brisbane, so we could be seeing some of those guys in action. Not that we'll be watching it or anything like that, but that could be a guide to see how ready he is if he can perform. Because let's face it, the NEFL team hasn't had any recognised forwards. The last year they had all these guys, buggerising around up forward, but none of them were over. I think the tallest of them was 188 centimetres, and Emmanuel Baru, and he did pretty well as far as that's concerned. But if you've got someone who's actually got a bit of size and marking ability and maturity, that NEFL team is going to be very strong. And it's important to have a strong NEFL team so that all these fringe players and returning players coming back from injury can actually, be playing in simulated conditions and the same structures as the senior team. And I think we'll see a healthy rotation of players who, if they just don't fit, or there's no matchup for them, or there's a form issue, or a niggling injury or whatever. I think guys like Corbett and Leslie could see themselves coming back in. We don't know with Aaron Young if it's going to be 3 weeks or 13 weeks. So he's sort of listed as indefinite, and it's a bit of a bummer. But what I will say about that is similar to what you said. Last year we brought in Harrison Wigg, Aaron Young, and Nick Holman as these sort of mature bodies, and it was kind of like the kinds of trades or rookie picks that you make where if it doesn't work out, then c'est la vie. Well, it worked out for two of them. And this time around, we've gone back to the well and got a bunch of mature players. So, as long as two or three of them can sort of come on, then that sort of lays the foundation for our really talented high draft picks to come on themselves and have a bit of competition for their spots. And so I'm kind of quite gung ho about that. I'd really like to see these guys. Let's go through it. There's guys like Braden Crossley and Brad Shear and Will Brodie, Jacob Dawson, Jacob Heron, Connor Nutting, Jez McLennan. They're going to be playing in the NEFL. If we had some of those caliber guys last year, then we would have won the NEFL. It's going to be a really interesting thing to see players coming from the lower grade coming in and being ready to hit the AFL in form.
Yeah, well, the NEFL's definitely going to be worth watching for a Suns fan this year to see these boys coming up. And also, the Suns NEFL side should be fairly competitive most weeks, to get wins.
Yeah.
They should have a pretty good strong side, with barring the fact we cop any more injuries.
Yeah, well, but look, we've got 9 injuries right now, and by this time next week we'll have 7. And there's no game between now and then. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll have 5 injuries, but that'll be after 2 games. So an injury list of 5 players, and let's say we have an injury in each game, 7 players isn't a bad injury list. There are other clubs who've got injury lists of 15 plus already. So we're doing okay. We're doing okay. Let's not forget the NEFL will also feature our under-19s guys who might have come close to being rookie drafted, except for the fact that we've, obviously had a very different rationale for our recruitment over the holiday, over the off season. There are guys who are in that sort of last gasp group, like my boy Dirk Conan, who desperately want to make it into the Suns senior team, and that this is their last season to do it. So there's 9 of them, and then you've got your academy players who are under 18 academy players who are going to be playing against the TAC Cup teams, and then have national championships. Well, second half of the season, we're going to see guys like Ashton Crossley and Connor Bedarick and Ace O'Hire, and just some really, really, really good players who are going to be coming in and lifting that NEFL team. So by the end of the year, I think we'll have probably played 35 to 40 players in the AFL, and we're going to have this next group coming through, and that sort of like the academy players, I'm anticipating maybe 5 that we pick up. It'll be like the year before last. So I'm quite hyped for that.
Yeah. All right, well, we've spent enough time talking about the injuries. We've better get into the actual game. So while I'm dissecting the start of the game, the scores, can you just check your microphone, Tom? It seems like you're getting a bit of static coming through there. So while
Might
you
just
do
be
that,
the fan. Bloody fan is it's too hot.
all right, all right. Well, let's get into the game. The Gold Coast Suns were defeated by Sydney, 11 goals, 15, 81 to 19 goals, 9, 123. So the big thing here was we lost by 42 points, and that was the margin we lost the second quarter by when Sydney kicked 9 goals to 2. Now, the most damning stat from the whole game was 20 to 8 against in the centre clearances. So that was 20 to 8 against the Suns. Now that's a flogging in, to put it bluntly, that's a flogging in the midfield. Especially considering Witts was dominating the tap outs. I think he had around 60 plus hit outs, and he was only up against Aliir, so not a recognised ruckman for Sydney. Despite Aliir actually playing quite well, it was just really disappointing that the Suns didn't make the most of the ruck advantage that they had. Now, do you think
I'll
that's
pull you up there a little bit because it was Witts got 46 hit outs and Peter Wright got 17 hit outs, which I think is twice as good as anything that he's ever done. So there is a bit of good news there, and Witts wasn't sort of making world record hit out numbers, and Aliir had 17 hit outs.
Okay, I must have been looking at the team stats then when I was looking for the hit outs.
You're right. But I mean,
so,
they were dominating.
Yeah, but either way, Witts. Do you think it's a case of Witts not making the most of the actual tap work, or is it our midfielders just not getting to the ball?
Well, there's a third thing there, and that's when you face top-rated midfields, which we've done 2 weeks in a row now, they anticipate where the ball's going to fall better than our mids, and that's something our mids need to get across. Do you remember in the very early days of Witts playing for us, him and Ablett just had this fantastic relationship. I think Ablett broke the AFL record for most stoppage clearances in a game. And Witts was just tapping it down, and Ablett would just run around and pick it up, and off he'd race. And we were winning games with that dominant ruckman. And then somehow last year he just couldn't seem to find a partner who was going to consistently get it. I think Miller is probably the guy who is doing it best. Two things. Aliir would go up for the ruck contest and recover from it much more quickly, which with the 6-6-6 rule essentially meant that the Gold Coast had 3 midfielders against 4 Swans midfielders. And what would basically happen is in the tussle for the ball, if a Swan got a hold of it, then he'd hand pass to another Swan, who'd hand pass it to the other one, who'd hand pass to the other one, and next thing you know, they're out. And there's not much a guy the size of Witts is going to be able to do about that. So there's something we've got to...
Yeah, so, I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Essentially, they had a bit more flexibility around the ground, having a more mobile player like Aliir there. Yeah,
well, I mean, in the stoppages, we won plenty of those, although we should have won more with the amount of ball, so the Swans were still able to steal it off us at the stoppages around the ground, but we were a lot better at doing that, and we converted. When we were winning stoppages around the ground, we were going forward and getting it inside 50. So yeah, that you've hit the nail on the head. It's those centre clearances where you're far more likely to convert that to a forward 50 and some sort of result.
Okay. I just want to pick you up with the conversion because we had 15 behinds to 11, so that's not great. But then you also look at the turnovers, which was horrendous. So many skill errors being made by these boys. Now, I don't know if it was the 34, 36 degree heat and the humidity, But,
Yeah.
I think I saw an article somewhere saying 16 or 17 of the players on the field for the Suns had less than 70% disposal efficiency. That's not good enough. That's really not good enough, despite the heat. I mean, we had better disposal efficiency in humid conditions, wet and slippery, up in Mackay the week before.
Yeah, the indictment on our game was our disposal efficiency. There were some guys who were doing really good stuff with the ball, and other guys who were just basically just hacking it and doing all the kinds of things that you hate. I mean, Charlie Ballard, perfect example. Two times he grubbed it straight to an opponent, and then the opponent, because they were feeling cocky, just sent it back over his head for a 12-point turnaround. And in fact, that might have actually been more like a 24-point turnaround, because going coast to coast is so much easier to do when you're coming out of your zone than it used to be. A guy like Braden Fiorini goes out and touches the ball 26 times, and 14 of them were ineffective. So you might as well just touch it 12 times.
Fiorini had 76% time on ground. Sorry, I thought that was going to say disposal efficiency. I can't even read my own handwriting. Miller as well had 31 disposals with 73% time on ground as well. But Miller's disposal efficiency, I think I calculated he only really had about 14 to 16 effective possessions. So it wasn't just Fiorini. It's just way too many of our boys didn't have the skills. I will say Hanley had 93% disposal efficiency for his 16 disposals. So he didn't get as much of the ball as the other boys, but he certainly used it well. And that was one of the highlights I can take away from the game, was just seeing Hanley get the ball and run and kick it and hit targets.
Yeah, and that's basically one disposal that wasn't effective, and that came very early in the game when he was still trying to sort of find his feet. He got better as the game went on, and his run, running the ball out of defensive 50 was just fantastic. He's going to be really good for us. It was a freak injury last year, as we know. And then they made the decision not to operate, and then he came out and he injured it again, which lost us the game against Freo. So, he's now got that shoulder fixed, and there's absolutely no reason why he can't play the whole 22 games this year. So, it's fine. We're finally going to get a chance to have a look at him. Fingers crossed he doesn't end up like some of the other guys. But anyway. I do believe that you've hit the nail on the head with that statistic about disposal efficiency. There may be some guys who find themselves not getting selected next week due to that. On both teams, there were some guys in the other team who were also not so great, and Sydney's the kind of team that really highly values disposal efficiency. So I think we can probably put maybe 5 or 10% for some of those guys on their efficiency down to the sweaty ball, the sticky conditions. But both teams are playing in the same conditions, and the Swans had, by and large, they had better disposal efficiency. We had some outstanding guys though. Darcy McPherson used the ball really well all day, and he only played half the game. And Lockie Weller, and I mentioned to you earlier on Ben King, when he did have the ball, he used it really well. And the guys who had 100% disposal efficiency only spent 31 and 17% of time on the ground. So you can't really say they were, they were exemplary. 26 down to 22, that's going to be tough to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. We'll focus on that next week when we're looking at, our episode will come out before the 22 is selected, so we'll be spending most of that episode talking about who we think is best 22. But let's go back to the forward setup for the Suns in this game. We kicked 11 goals. Wright, Sexton and Lukosius had 2 goals apiece. And one thing I did notice, one strategy which I was talking to you about during the game, was what I like to call the Gold Coast wave. It's essentially kicking the ball into space and having 3 or 4 Suns players running onto it. So not just one, but they usually had 2 or 3 options. And it worked a couple of times to get some goals. But for a majority of the game, I don't think it worked as effectively as what it was the week before with the Bulldogs. And I think against the Bulldogs, we were targeting more leads and honouring the players that were leading or going for marks. I just feel like this. I think realistically, this just doesn't suit us. The running onto the ball. Mind you, we probably weren't playing the best players for that sort of a role. You would think if we were going to go into that in round 1, you'd have all your speedsters in that forward line. You'd be going like a mosquito fleet, like what we saw from Carlton a few years back. So your Achi, your Ainsworth, your Sexton, all sort of running as fast as they can to get to that ball.
Yeah, I always like to see a Gold Coast player marking the ball inside 50. Just doesn't happen as often as you need it to happen to win games. But in that year you were talking about, those guys were getting goals from anywhere and everywhere. Darcy wasn't on the field long enough to get a goal. And if we're going to talk about purely where our goals are coming from, well, Lukosha's got a couple of nice ones. Sexton had 4 shots on goal, got 2 of them in. That's not bad for a small forward. 2 metre Peter, he didn't have the greatest game again, but I will say this: you look at his stat line, and he was the best on the field for effort, because he's gone out and chopped out in the ruck for about 25% of the game. He's played 78% on the field, so it shows how knackered he was. And he's gone out and got 17 possessions, 7 marks, 2 goals, 2. Well, and that doesn't even reflect the out of bounds on the full.
well, that's a pretty good day out for a forward. So I think Peter Wright had a pretty good game actually. I thought Lukosius's goals were probably opportunistic would be the right word. The right place, right time. He showed good skills to lay tackles, but I think both of his goals came from free kicks, didn't they?
Yeah, but
I know one of them did.
It's good to see. Yeah, they both did, and it's good to see that he was just able to just calm, cool. I'm just going to kick this goal, and it's not a big deal. And that's what we need from a forward, a marking forward like that. He's still a few years off being elite, but he's already showing the signs that he can compete. I don't know whether he plays next week or not, because Burgess seems to have played himself into that role. And do we want to go with 2 small, 2 medium, and 2 tall forwards, or we know that Peter Wright can't really put defensive pressure on, but can Lukosius do that, as well as maybe say someone like Ainsworth or Archie?
Well, I think Lukosius scoring 2 goals from 2 tackles is a result of his defensive work. So he shows that. All right, well, let's move on. There's an article on the AFL website at the moment discussing the rule changes and the effect they've had on the clubs through the JLT games. So if we look down at the Gold Coast section, they talk about the midfield first of all, and how it's a slight area of concern for the Suns with the 6-6-6 structure. Tuke Miller, David Swallow, Jack Bowes were popular hitmen for Gold Coast, but even with a winger set up defensively, on occasions the Swans walked away with some easy clearances that led directly to shots at goal. Now, that's dead set accurate, and that is probably the biggest concern for the club. How are we going to be able to stop that run on? With these new rule changes, there is potential that if we see the Suns of old that drop their heads and just sort of give up through a game, it could get nasty very quickly.
Yeah, well, let's just say we've had 2 really good games against 2 really good midfields who showed up our deficiencies. So we're not going to we're not going to face midfields like that until round 3 when we play the Bulldogs. Well, we beat them last week, but they beat us in the midfield in that area, and in the game for points last year where Witts had one of the top 10 all-time ruckman games for stats in 160 years of AFL footy, and they still beat us because they were able to dominate those clearances and win stoppages against the grain. We need one or two big fellas. Swallow's not small, and Jack Bowes is getting bigger. But we just need. I think there's a couple of things that we need. So I'll concentrate on the second thing first, and that is Jordan Murdoch off halfback flank or off the wing, because this has been an AFL wide trend. Instead of playing your wingman right on the centre, you play him back towards the defensive 50, and he runs straight in and fills that gap. So if the opposition does win the ball, they're running towards 7 defenders on 6 players. So any numerical advantage that they've gotten by breaking away out of the middle is nullified by that winger running in behind the ball and coming in and trying to chop it off. So Murdoch's got the speed. Maybe Holman's got he's full tilt when he's running at it. He's another one who could come off that flank and really run in on the centre bounces. So I don't know. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's difficult because I don't know whether Murdoch. I think Murdoch is better off a halfback flank and also with the kick-in responsibilities. We saw Ballard screw up a couple of kick-in responsibilities. That's not his style. I think he's more of an interceptor, using the ball up the ground, not in close quarters. Whereas
he changed his boots. Did you see he changed his boots at half time?
Yeah, I did.
Played much better.
But Murdoch, I really noticed how much we struggled to get the ball out of our defensive 50 when he wasn't playing against Sydney. And I think that is with his penetrating kick and his leg speed, he was just able to clear that ball past that zone that opposition team set up in. Yeah, Hanley and Harbrow to an extent as well, but they just didn't seem to do it as well as what Murdoch did. I'm just convinced that's Murdoch's position in our side as a kick-in
I agree.
specialist.
I totally agree with you, but I just think he could also be a specialist winger in that sense that for when you're matching up in throughout the game, he's going to be a defender. But if you can put him on the wing and put your winger in defence at the centre bounce, you're going to have 7 players. Look, it's who can get there first, because it's a long way from the wing in to try and beat those midfielders, because they're running 20 metres and you've got to run 25. But someone as fast as him could do it. But I would say Jack Martin reads the play well enough that if he was coming off the wing. The reason Jack Bowes spent time in defence was to teach him how to come off the wing. Lachie Weller's got pace to get there, so it doesn't need to necessarily be the fastest guy in the team. And I think Weller's only a whisker slower than Murdoch. Just Murdoch's a bit bigger. So if it was someone like Kennedy running on the ball, breaking free, then you'd want a Holman or a Murdoch to come in and chop him off, because a smaller guy isn't going to be as effective at shutting down the play. Yet again, I think what it comes down to is a lot of the time the Gold Coast are willing in defence, but the opposition can just get that ball away, and the better teams are able to put together 3, 4, 5 handballs and they're out. And we lay 5 tackles, but it's just not quite enough. And we end up with 5 players on the ground because we've just had 5 tackles.
Yeah.
So they only need one guy on his feet with the ball to get past us then.
Okay.
That's
we've
for
got to
basic
wrap it up,
footy.
Tom.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry, we've got about 30 seconds left before it's going to cut out on us. So let's wrap it up. We'll come back and talk about all this next week in our episode, same time next Tuesday night, as a pre-season preview for the St Kilda game. Tom, you've been keeping up with the articles on the Facebook page, so thanks for that. The match previews are fantastic, and hopefully you'll keep up with them. But we've got to go, so thanks for listening to the show, and go Suns.
Go Suns.